Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Chit Chatting with Jocelyn. I'm your host, Jocelyn, and we're here on a nice rainy day in southern Nashua. I have two fabulous shows for you today. And the first one, I know it's old hat, old news, old masks, because, after 10 minutes, they're old and dirty and disgusting. Just saying. I have a fabulous guest here, Wayne Saya, and we are going to do the 101 for everybody. What's the truth about a mask? How many different kinds of masks are there? What do they do? Why are we all of a sudden, after hundreds of years, smothering ourselves with some kind of cloth across our face in the name of saving people? It sounds good. It looks good. Makes people feel good, apparently. But there are some really awful ramifications. There are people that literally can't breathe. They have heart conditions, lung conditions, asthma. We have people that are deaf and they read lips. You ever try to do that with a mask on? We have children that don't know a face, a kind face. They can't read facial expressions. They don't know the proper enunciation for grammar and words. It's absolutely destroyed schools. And the bottom line is, are they really safe? So on that note, thank you for coming to the show, Wayne.
It's my pleasure.
I'm so glad to have you back again. We'll see how long the show stays up because apparently, YouTube doesn't like the truth that you and I bring. So we'll give it a whirl and see what happens because there's always rumble. So talk to me about what kind of masks there are. We've got paper masks that came in those little boxes, and we'll talk about what the box says. We've got those, underwear on your face masks that people thought were funny. We got grandma and auntie making masks. They got beautiful material and they're excellent seamstresses, and not to put them down, but making us cloth masks because people did realize they needed at least one a day. We've got N95 masks. We've got, I can't even think of the other ones, paper masks, surgical masks. Well, they're the same, surgical masks.
Well, I can tell you first and foremost that masks in the United States, or what they call face coverings, are covered under Title 21 of the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA.
Really?
They're really not covered under the CDC. The CDC does not have regulatory authority with regard to a medical device. And a medical device is constituted as a face covering.
So I'm going to break this down, being the teacher and translator, and not to put anybody down, but I think we have had 2.5 going on 3 years of misrepresentation, misinformation, fear-mongering, and a lot of money making.
Well, masks or filtration is rated under what's called a MERV rating, which is an acronym for minimum efficiency rating value or something like that. And the MERV rating is broken up into, like, for instance, for a school, you should have at least a MERV 13, and between a 13 and a 16.
Okay.
When you want to take what's called 0.3 of a micron or around 0.3 of a micron, that would be around the viral or virus area, and that falls under high efficiency particulate or HEPA, a HEPA rating.
Right.
What people don't understand is that if you have just a regular cloth mask on, that the material isn't dense enough to stop a viral infection. It's not even small enough to stop bacteria. The reason why hospitals use masks a lot, and for good reason, is because of bacteria, not because of viral infections or viruses. Because
bacteria is bigger than a virus.
Bacteria is a lot bigger.
Okay.
And a mask can stop a bacteria particulate from going in.
Right. It's not a great picture, but if you can see the yellow here, that's the size of a bacteria. And this little teeny dot down here is the size of a virus, just for proportion-wise for the audience. So the mask can catch the big bacteria.
That's correct.
Virtually no mask can catch a virus.
A mask cannot catch, well, let's put it this way. It might catch 20 or 30%, if at all.
Okay.
Because once one of them gets in your masks, into a face covering, you're now breathing it all the time.
Correct.
Because it's stuck there. In your mask.
Yeah.
In your face.
So
covering.
you inhale it, you exhale, exhale. Right.
And so if you go out and you put a regular cloth mask on during COVID is actually for coronavirus. And there are a number of coronaviruses, including the common cold.
Correct. And it's been for many, many years. There's just different versions of the coronavirus.
That's correct. But this happens to be coronavirus 19, okay? And I won't get into logistics of how they came up with the number 19.
Right.
What I will say is that it is a viral infection. And the mask won't stop a viral infection or a viral particulate from infecting you. And that's why many months ago I had litigated the issue within the town I live in.
Wow. So talk to me about, so people will say, and I worked 911 EMS and I have family members that work in the hospital, but continually people ask the question, well, if masks don't work, why do surgeons wear them? I mean, my understanding is, correct me, number one, there is the most phenomenal infiltration air cleaning system in the hospitals, in the ERs, and in the surgical suites. The air temperature is a very specific temperature for these procedures.
It's a cool environment.
Correct. So it doesn't grow. And the point was really more just so that the surgeon didn't have, a little bit of nose drip or a little bit of spit go into the patient. It wasn't really to stop particulates.
Well, what it is, it's actually
maybe a bacteria.
It has two reasons for it. The first being, if you're a surgeon, you're doing an operation, you don't want to get any particulates from your body fluid coming from your mouth onto the patient. And the mask will stop that. The second reason is bacteria.
Right.
And it's for both.
Correct.
You don't want any bacteria coming from the surgeon's mouth into an open wound, and vice versa. You don't want any bacteria coming from the patient to infect the surgeon.
Correct.
So those are the two main reasons why a surgeon wears a mask. And he doesn't wear what's called an N95.
Correct.
He uses just a regular
the paper
surgical grade mask,
Yep.
So that he can breathe for long periods of time without having any obstructions with regard to
Are those
breathing.
the same as those blue masks that we see everywhere, that there were boxes and boxes of them and they'd hand you one every time? Do they wear those? Are those the same surgical masks?
I think different hospitals wear different grades of masks.
So there's different
grades. They have them in yellow, blue,
Okay.
depending upon the type of grade of mask that they want
right.
to use. But I think what is most important here is you've got an N95, for instance. And N95 masks it's a very dense mask.
Yep.
It probably will stop maybe 30%, and this is from my experience. It might be able to stop 30% of viruses, but because it's 0.3 of a micron, it doesn't stop any particulate smaller than
that,
0.3 of a micron. You'll get smaller than 0.3 of a micron, maybe lodged in the fibers of the mask, but eventually they get through.
Correct. Either going out from breathing or getting sucked back into your lungs.
Yes, but most importantly, you've got some cities and towns that would require, in certain circumstances, an N95 mask. But N95 masks cannot be worn by patients that have pulmonary illnesses.
Correct.
Lung diseases.
Yep.
It can't be worn by people with heart conditions. They don't work. No mask works with a beard.
Yep.
Because
Well, they have to be tightly fitted because we wear them on the ambulance. And so you have to be tested. They put the mask on, you put a hood on, and they spray. And you have to make sure it's completely fitted to your face. And like you said, a beard does not make a clean
no, a
connection.
beard or a mustache.
Yep.
You can't. There's no reasoning why you would wear a mask if you have a beard on, wearing a beard. So there's three major, and even actually up to five major reasons why a regular mask wouldn't work. But if you try to wear an N95 mask and you're an elderly person that has one of those ailments, it's very difficult to know that you're going outside, you're being protected by a viral infection, and you're not able to wear the top protection of that situation, and
Right.
therefore you go out with a cloth mask that really does nothing.
So you're going into an environment where there's very, very tiny infinitesimal particulates, a virus that virtually may stick to your mask, but most of them go through. But these senior people, true people at risk, don't have access to the absolute proper mask if there is one.
Well, even if they did have access to it, they wouldn't be able to use it because of their illness or ailment.
Yep.
And because of their disability. Now, one of the issues that we had during the COVID years, 2020, 2021, is the United States Attorney General put out a memoranda, and that memoranda stated that COVID should not be a reason to have a disability or to create a disability, words to that effect. And because of that, people that didn't have a disability but ended up having disability when they put the mask on,
correct,
weren't covered under ADA, the Americans with Disabilities
Act. Correct. So people that putting on masks. So I have a friend that she had been beaten up. She had been assaulted, and putting on a mask absolutely took her back to the assault. And they said, that's not a disability. Get over it. Put your mask on and, suck it up type of thing. And I know that happened to many people. Again, elderly people growing up in the war. And there are people and wearing the gas masks. My mom was one of them. It was very, very difficult to put this thing on her face and make her wear it all the time. And again, with medical disabilities and medical situations, they couldn't breathe.
Well, that was the unfortunate situation that a lot of cities and towns, when they put their mask mandates into place, none of that was accounted for. So when whether it was an elderly person and let's face it, some elderly people don't look their age.
Correct.
And some people who have heart ailments, which can be in your 30s and 40s. They look healthy, and you've got people explaining to you, look, there's a mask mandate in place, you have to put your mask on. And you say, well, I can't, but where's your doctor's letter? Well, I can't get a doctor's letter because I only have I'm only disabled when I wear the mask.
The mask, correct.
And because of the Attorney General's memoranda, nobody could do that.
So let me ask you this. Do these towns and cities actually have authority to dictate to the people that you must wear a mask? It's not in the Constitution. I don't think any laws were passed by either the federal Congress or the state House.
Well, I can only account for New Hampshire.
Okay.
Because of the complaint I filed in U.S. District Court.
Okay.
But in New Hampshire, masks are, I should say, face coverings are dictated by the Department of Health and Human Services.
So there's already existing legislation for that.
There's an existing state law in place that specifically states, and it's in the words, that an individual, a citizen of New Hampshire, or that's not just domicile, but a citizen in New Hampshire, does not have to be forced to take any treatment that they do not want upon themselves. In other words, and let me explain that a little bit better.
A forced medical type
Well, if somebody
treatment medical apparatus.
if somebody says, we want you to have this treatment,
Yep.
you have the right of refusal for an alternate treatment. Okay? And that's in the state law of New Hampshire. And that state law was written pursuant to the New Hampshire Constitution. So, although the New Hampshire Constitution doesn't cite face coverings, it cites the due process clause. I think it's Article 14, the due process clause in New Hampshire. And what really concerned me is a lot of the attorneys in New Hampshire were going with First Amendment claims. I think if they had went with a 14th Amendment claim, they probably would have been better off. And I'm not a lawyer. I'm a regulatory guy. But as a regulatory guy, I would have looked at that state law and said, wait a second, the state law specifically states that I'm in charge of my own treatment, that I have the liberty and freedom to choose my own treatment. So why are cities and towns preempting the state law?
Correct.
And that goes to another issue, which you're not allowed to preempt state law if a state law already exists.
Right. So DHHS already had state law, and we had a governor and cities and towns that just stomped right on it and made their own rules and regulations when it already existed. And it seems to me you need to go with what already exists unless the legislative branch decides to change it.
I think because the confusion that because of this was a novel situation that hit the country and New Hampshire, and the governor was responding typically to other states and what was going on. I think that I believe he was probably misinformed by his attorney general. And for purposes of disclosure, I'm not a fan of the New Hampshire Attorney General because of some of the decisions or some of the things he's done. But with regard to the governor, the legislature in New Hampshire recognized what was happening, and this past April passed legislation. I believe it was House Bill 440. Okay. And that House bill said that even during a governor's state of emergency, citizens no longer will lose their freedoms or their liberties.
Right.
And that was signed into law. And now, if the governor does have put out a state of emergency, citizens will no longer lose their liberties.
Correct. Okay. Because technically it's for his employees, state employees type of thing. It doesn't actually pertain to
Well, I mean,
people.
state employees are citizens
Same way
too.
as well.
So I think that's something that I'd probably have to look at. But not being a lawyer, I couldn't answer that question.
So in going through looking at the masks and the boxes,
yes.
I took quick little shots of them, and it says, must fully cover from nose to below chin. It just seems one size fits all the time. I don't know anybody whose masks fit. I don't know anybody that didn't touch it 100 times. And I mean, working on the ambulance, the minute that it got damp, you changed it out. And it had to be tight fitting. How many people hung it from their mirror saying, oh, the sunlight's going to cleanse it? Oh, well, if the sunlight's going to cleanse that piece of cloth, don't you think it's going to cleanse, the air that you're breathing in and out? Just side note.
Well, one of the things I recognize when I read that document is when you've got individuals, especially hospitals, they're requiring, to this day, they still require face masks or face coverings. And one of the things that is really is confusing to me is certainly you want to wear a face covering if you're going to see a patient that may have some bacterial infection or bacteria within the hospital ward, but and possibly in the hospital itself. But if people didn't have to wear face coverings before COVID, I'm not sure why they would have to wear them now.
Right, because the bacteria was the same pre-COVID as it is post-COVID. So that's not something that changed. What changed was this virus that's infinitesimally small and has a fabulous number after it, so it sounds really cool.
Well, I think there's a standard there, and I don't know whether it's a double standard, but there's a standard out there with regard to the to COVID itself, and why they and that standard is prior to COVID, you used to be able to get a shot to guard against any type of mumps or measles or diphtheria, whatever ailment you had, and the statute, the federal statute would state, and the CDC would say that this will prevent you from receiving that type of illness in the future.
Correct. That you won't transmit it and you won't get it.
Right. It's a.
But this is a first time that they've had.
Well, the CDC changed the definition now.
Right.
Now the CDC's definition of a booster shot or any type of a shot is that this will help prevent.
Help prevent, not definitely prevent, not. Yeah, so that makes it very suspect as well. The other thing, before we finish this half, the bacterial and fungal isolation. So parents took the children's masks from school and they sent them into laboratories because they wanted to be, kids are always touching everything, they're dirty, and you touch the mask, you breathe it in. God only knows what's actually on the mask, and what they found were, I don't even know if I can say half of these, but Fonseca, Mucor, Triophyton, Rhodotorula, Penicillium, Microsporum, Malassea, all sorts of these really fancy Latin names that I'm not going to pretend to say. I also have one here. They found Streptococcus on the masks. They found tuberculosis, meningitis, sepsis, encephalitis, bloodstream infections, UTIs resistant to antibiotics, food poisoning, Lyme disease, diphtheria, Legionnaire's disease, which I think was a lot more than we thought. Half of the masks were contaminated with one or more strains of pneumonia, causing bacteria, one or more strains of meningitis. The face masks studied were new or freshly laundered before wearing, had been worn 5 to 8 hours by children age 6 through 11. And it was just absolutely insane because the masks provided a warm, moist environment, and these bacteria grew, proficiently, making these children very ill. Skin and teeth decayed and mouth disease.
Well, I think what was happening there is, remember, masks when they're wearing in the hospital, they'll take them off when they leave a room. They'll put a new one back on.
Correct.
There's probably a half dozen to a dozen mask changes per day.
Absolutely.
But in a school environment, you put the mask on in the morning, you take it off at night, you put it in your house, and you wear the same mask in the morning.
Correct.
And so there were no guidelines or regulatory or regulations that were providing parents with the appropriate information and guidance on what type of a mask to use. And that falls under the CDC, but it actually falls under the FDA. And it actually falls under, that also falls under Title 21. And that is because there also has to be a UL approval, or when I say UL, I mean a safety certification with regard to masks, just like you have to have a safety certification for electronic devices.
Yeah, for your toaster.
Exactly.
Or, yeah.
And so, there are only approximately 22 organizations approved by OSHA that provide that type of a service. Underwriter Laboratories, or UL, is only one of them. And they'll give a safety certification on how to use that mask and its intended purpose.
Yep.
And that is key when you're looking at something that has been safety certified, is its intended purpose.
So a lot of these masks were not safety certified.
Well, no, because they were masks that were created at home.
Yeah.
And therefore they were never safety certified, and nor was the city, the towns, or the state requiring any type of safety certification. So therefore, people that were putting masks on, and I will tell you, I didn't wear a mask during the whole COVID situation, because I learned that it would be better for me and for my body's health if I allowed my body to develop an immunity
Correct.
of what was out there already, and not continually to put bacterial lotion on my antibacterial
because
lotion
that kills
on
all
my hands.
even the good bacteria.
Well, you have good bacteria on your hands and on your face,
Better just
and
to
I
wipe
didn't
it
want
on
to
a paper
destroy
towel.
that. So
I agree with you. Oh my goodness. So let's see. Just to touch on OSHA just real quick. OSHA requires that your employer verifies you are receiving a minimum of 19.5% oxygen by law. I didn't see anybody ensuring that. We had people passing out and fainting, overheating. We have, OSHA, people that worked in OSHA and specifically in surgical situations and with masks saying, N95 masks and ported P95, which has the little valve there, you breathe it out. You're in a dirty situation, so your breath goes into a dirty situation.
Well, let me interject there just for a moment, because that valve in a lot of circumstances can be very important. But I will tell you that a lot of restaurants that I went in where I would have to, I kept a mask on me, I didn't wear it religiously. If I wear it so that when I entered a restaurant, I'd have it on under my nose. And then when you sat down, you'd be able to take it off.
Correct.
That didn't make any sense. And the reason is because of the flow of bacteria with regard to the flow of air from the air handling units.
Yep.
And you've got an air supply and a discharge, both in the ceiling. It's supposed to be, or typically on one end of the room, and then a discharge in one end, a supply air in the other. And it creates a flow of air, and that's what they're supposed to do. There are situations where if you have a flow of air going and you're sitting in a booth in a restaurant and that those particulates are flying right by you, what's the difference of whether or not you're entering a restaurant from outside?
Yep.
Or whether or not you're sitting in a booth?
There isn't.
There's no situation.
So we really, this was a lot of, how do I want to say this? A lot of fast-moving, quick decision-making, not necessarily based on good science.
Well, you have a lot of your legislatures, they're not doctors, so they rely upon the doctors, and they rely upon who gives them the most money, which is the pharmaceutical companies.
Right. Well, this half hour has certainly flown, so I want to thank you for talking about Masks 101 with me, and I want to thank you for joining me, chit-chatting with Jocelyn, and we'll see you at the next show.